So jumping right in, because I know you got a lot going on, how do you create conflict right from the start? And I will preface that by saying there's no prologue or anything that's in your book. It just starts right off, and there's no teaser. There is
Right.
enough going on right in front with her in well, let's don't do any spoilers. There's
Right,
going on
right.
enough right in front that that we are pulled in immediately to the character and the situation and its conflict. First paragraph, how do you do that?
Yeah. So I think the first chapter is usually the setup of the story, or that's the intention. And it's how, especially in a thriller, how to make that setup as enticing and exciting and immersing as possible. And I think because people pick up thrillers for a thrill, obviously, that adding conflict to that opening is a great way to do that. And I think there's so much you can learn about that character initially by putting them into some kind of pressure situation. So by adding in this first scene, we have my main character living in her car. That's not a spoiler. And we get a bit of backstory and who she is. And then something happens in that moment that really reveals a lot about who she is and really kicks off her, launching her into the story and how lost and alone and forlorn she really is. So does that answer?
Yeah, that answers. Compare and contrast, though. Many thriller writers that I read go some sort of prologue that has nothing to do with the current action, and you immediately go, okay, there's going to be a detective waking up in the middle of the night with a phone call, and it's going to kind of go on like that. But you jump right into the action. What advice do you give for coming up with that technique?
Yeah, so I feel there's been a little bit of a backlash against the prologue in recent years. So I've used prologues in the past, definitely. But I feel like now people are starting to say that's a bit of a cop out. It's kind of it's using it as a teaser to lure people in, whereas perhaps it's more challenging, but maybe more fulfilling to add another plot point, as opposed to taking something that happens later in the book and bringing it to the front, is to start your chapter or start your novel with something that is, while not the inciting incident, it still is a very active, exciting moment. So I did an interview last night with Wendy Walker. We were on our Instagram live together, and she has a new book out that starts with a mass shooting. And we were talking about two stories that really start with very intense and emotional scenes right off the bat. And I feel like it's quite effective.
Yeah. Now, the your main character is completely at odds with herself all the time. It's conflict, conflict, conflict. I mean, she is not comfortable in her skin. How do you come up with that dichotomy between those within the character itself?
Well, this
And it's just not your protagonist, it's your other characters as well. They are conflicting. Any other narrator is conflicting as well.
Yeah,
So
true. And I think it's very much sort of a fish out of water scenario in that particularly I sort of have two protagonists, but the one woman was, a very successful businesswoman, ran her own restaurant, and she ends up homeless. So she isn't, her whole internal conflict is that this is not who I am and this is not how I want to be looked at, and I don't want to be judged, and I am always trying to climb out of these circumstances because she doesn't see herself as a homeless person. And that's sort of the one of the first lines of the book is, how did I view the homeless before I became one of them? Or what did I think of the homeless before I became one of them? Not much is the short answer. So yeah, she suddenly fallen to a point that she never could have seen herself getting to. And that was important to me to kind of show that, it could happen to anybody, right? From a compassionate viewpoint, everyone who ends up in those circumstances has a story, and has, choices that were wrong, or circumstances beyond their control, that ends up with them on the street.
And there's also the conflict between what is their moral compass and what they're going to be doing. And so
Yeah.
there's multiple ways to infuse that conflict within the character itself.
Absolutely. And I think stripping away the security and the comfort, she now has to say, what am I willing to do to survive? Right. And I think that is a universal experience, and that people in certain circumstances are pushed. Don't they say we're all a murderer? We just need to have the right set of circumstances, right? So you don't know when you are everything is stripped away from a character, how far they're willing to go to
And you
survive.
really push them in your book.
Yes, I definitely did pushed both main characters, definitely.
And speaking of both main characters, you're great at creating conflict between the characters themselves. How do you do that? Does it come naturally to you? Do you make a grid of opposing views, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, these two women that I created for this book, it was very easy because they both are very damaged. One is homeless and one is in an abusive marriage, and they need each other. They're so isolated, both of them, that they need each other so much. But then, can they trust each other? Do they, is one using the other, vice versa? And so there is a lot of inherent conflict um, in their circumstances. And then also I think the fact that they are so connected because they don't have anybody else.
What did they when in the situation that they are in both of them, almost it's like there's when I got halfway through the book, I thought, okay, because I'm looking for the thematic B story that's running through, and I'm like, okay, I see the similarities of these stories taking place but between these two characters. They're following a similar type trajectory between their two character arcs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Except comics starting from very different places. They're
Yes,
all
very
going
different
in
places.
opposites.
Yes, yes, yes. But it's almost like a Mozart theme. There's one theme, it's a variation on a theme that's going on, which was very clever to do. I thought it
Oh,
was
thank you.
I thought it was wonderful. Uh, do you always find, because of the homelessness of it and the other extreme society culture, you found many conflicts just in society itself? Uh, do you set out to do that, or was it just uh, happen happen to be the setting for this particular novel?
Yeah, I mean, it's so prevalent in so many of my novels, because one thing that always I'm always drawn to is the facades that people present and the judgment that is inherent in society. And so in this case, we have one character, the abused woman living in her cliffside mansion, who is, the judgment comes from her being a trophy wife and not really contributing, and she's feeling judged by other women and society in general, and she's painting a picture of perfection when it's anything but. Her relationship is horrible. And then we have another woman who's facing the judgment and scorn of being homeless when she used to be like a really successful member of the economy, and running her dream restaurant. And now she's suddenly on, people look at her with scorn, people are afraid of her, they're uneasy around her, she's lost. There was even superficial things that I added in there, like she loses all her makeup and at one point. And I thought even that, that as a woman who is used to presenting herself a certain way in society, and suddenly you don't have your makeup, you don't have a blow dryer, you don't have, the way that we exist in our little ecosystems, and then suddenly all of the material things are stripped away. was an interesting way to show that societal conflict, I thought.
Yeah, I love the way you just like stripped away everything bit by
Yeah.
bit, and I thought the little touches, just like the makeup case, were brilliant. And then also you used conflicts related to nature. I noticed the coldness of the water, the darkness of the alleys, the darkness in the dumpsters, and the just the feeling of the humidity of different things seem to work against the characters themselves as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think thank you. Because one character is homeless and there is a drowning scene. So they are, they're Pacific Northwest, which is where I live. I live in Vancouver. Um, and it's harsh environmental elements. And then I also think there's sort of an urban survival story as well in being homeless in a city, and how she kind of chooses nature over the dangers of downtown. She chooses the dangers of the forest and the city and the weather because she feels safer there. That's what drove her to that environment, was that it was, the lesser of two evils.
Well, and it just goes back and forth, like just for example, warmth, but yet in an
Yeah.
unsafe place, and then cold, but yet in
Yeah.
an unsafe place, and it's back and forth. And so nature is just working against as well. And then you incorporate technology, a lot of conflict with technology, and no spoilers in this, but you use technology even in, a homeless story, that you've
Yeah.
got some technology that's going on that really is working against the human spirit.
Yes, true. And I did quite a bit of research into, the realities of being homeless. And I have a friend who was a homeless outreach worker for many, many years. And he told me about these dumb phones that people get that don't have data, but that you literally in this day and age cannot live without a phone. I mean, you can't get any sort of social support. You can't pick up a shift at a job. You definitely need it. But she has a different level of technology than someone with more sophisticated technology that's living, a comfortable life. So she is at what's the word? Like, she has diminished resources when it comes to research and stuff like that. She has to go to cafes. She has to try to find the things that we take for granted that are at our fingertips, are suddenly kind of a bit removed for her, and it takes more effort.
And on the flip side, you do have bad guys, and they're really bad guys.
Yeah.
Uh, you've got bad guys that are using technology as well in really, I mean, ways that make you just like freak out and want to throw your phone away,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's some definite sort of, I guess you'd say, spyware being employed by some of these more sophisticated baddies.
Yeah. So, in terms of all of this conflict, does it come from trying to figure out at the very beginning what your characters care about? Where
Yeah.
where does it come from?
Yeah, I think that, when I write a thriller, I always start with a premise, and a premise often is a conflict, right? A premise for me for a thriller is often, what would you do if, you rescue this woman from drowning and then she asks you to help her disappear? And so there's inherent conflict in the whole bringing these two people together. And sorry, can you repeat the question? I started stuttering.
I said it
Sorry.
was, that's okay. I said it's kind of like trying to, how did you go about it? Is it because you look at what characters care about, and
Oh,
then
okay. Yeah, I think it comes from a premise, and then also the wants and the needs, right? That looking at what do these two women want and what do they really need. And so there's a lot of conflict in their wants, but then what they need is sort of to come together and help each other, but what they want is to use each other to get further ahead, get their needs, their expectations fulfilled. So Yeah, I think that there's, especially with a two-hander like this, with two protagonists, the conflict between them is everything, even though they may at times unify. It's sort of like they're bumping together and breaking apart all throughout the story.
Well, and I have to say it is on every single page. It's really, really a good read. It really is. I'm not just blowing smoke. It's one of the best books I've read in some time.
Wow, thank you.
Um,
That's so nice
but
to hear.
yeah,
Especially the day before pub day. It's very nice to hear.
um, do you set really big goals for all of your characters as well? Bad guys, good guys, everybody, guys. Everybody has a big goal. Even Randy the bartender's got a pretty good goal. So I mean,
Yeah.
there's big goals, and that helps, I assume, in creating conflict as well, because
Yeah.
you have opposing views of things that are really important to people.
Yes, I think that, yeah, like that every sort of ties into every character having an arc, even, the smaller, the superficial character, everybody having um something that's propelling them forward, which keeps, I think, is very important in a thriller because it keeps the pacing up and it keeps the action up if everybody is, honing in on their goal, and whether they get there or not, some of them won't, but it is nice to have that propulsion, I think.
Yeah, when you write your stories or wrote this story, do you have any tips for setting up obstacles between the characters and their goals? Because that's certainly conflict
Yeah.
as well, and it's almost like I couldn't believe the number of twists. And they were, I mean, just about every other page, there was a twist of something I did not see coming, or something that was stripped away, something that was important that was stripped away. So, do you have any tips for writers reading this for setting up obstacles between the characters and their goals?
Yeah, I think that especially in a thriller, I think that every chapter should be moving you forward in the story, but also holding you back from getting what you want. So I feel like I use a rough screenplay template. Save the Cat there's a Save the Cat writes a novel, which tells you all the big twists and turning points that need to be hit. And I just use those major beats. But then every chapter, as I'm writing toward my next turning point, where I know the characters are going to betray each other, or I know there's going to be a huge discovery on my road to get there. How bumpy can I make it for these characters? How many problems can I throw in their way that will make them, they still have to get there in the certain, allotted number of chapters, but I want to make it really difficult for them to get there.
So, when you start out, are you basically putting together like scene structure then to some
No,
degree?
I
And
I don't I don't outline that detailed. So what I do is I do sort of like, I always call it sort of like a tapestry hanging, where I go, okay, here's my inciting incident. Here's what is going to kick off this whole story. And then basically the first turning point is where we move into act two and everything's about to change. So I just have those huge beats, the first turning point, the midpoint, the second turning point, third act, the climax, just those huge plot points. And I find it so much less daunting than just sitting down and going, okay, I have to write 80,000 words or 350 pages and just go, right? I find if I write to that first turning point and then the second turning point, and I feel like it's so much more doable. So you're sort of writing in maybe, what is it, like 75-page chunks, as opposed to doing the full 350. And then it allows you in each, I don't break them out that way, but I think, okay, what's this chapter about? What do I want to achieve in this chapter? Okay, that's what I want to achieve, but how do I make that really, really difficult to get?
everything, and does this come under the premise, or where does this fall? Everything that you've got, I mean, your story is crossing and crossing and crossing, and it's really woven. Um, how that doesn't just come from just sitting down and being inspired. You've had to have something going on behind the scenes to maneuver through that labyrinth.
Yeah, so because this has a unique structure that I have never written this way before, where I have part one from Lee's perspective, and then I have part two from Hazel's perspective, covering the same ground, so covering the same time period. And I'd never done that before, but I've loved it in films and I've seen it done in TV, and I just always am really drawn to it. So I wanted to do it in a novel. So it was really kind of writing Lee's section first and then going through and plotting in against it. Okay, what was Hazel doing behind the scenes, right? What was she really doing? And scenes where they're together, and I had so much fun with like how they both remember it slightly differently. They had to build in all their encounters and make them. I do a calendar. I always do a calendar, and I did, okay, here's where Lee was on these days. And then, okay, here's where Hazel was, and here's where they connect. And so, yeah, I do it all kind of on an Excel calendar and put everybody's every day where they are in the plot and what they're up to.
Any advice for plot twists?
I think for a twist, if you really, to make it easier on yourself, think about this beforehand, but go, what are the readers expecting this to be, and go with something completely different.
So
And
there's two.
sometimes you don't have to know it
So
until
there's
you get.
Yeah, there's two different conflicts going on right there. One between what you expected as a writer
Yeah,
and conflicted with yourself, and then also conflicting with what the reader is expecting to happen. Do you have any final thoughts on writers who are starting their career? Some advice you'd like to give before we close?
sure. One thing I always encourage writers to do is to finish something. So it's very easy to start something. I've done it myself so many times and then abandon it and think, oh, maybe this isn't the one. It's not original enough. It's somebody's already done it. But until I actually finished projects, I didn't really have an understanding of what it takes to write a full novel, of understanding the story structure of a whole novel. So I think even if this isn't going to be the one that you send out, I think writing a full manuscript, a full story is a really, really important learning experience. And ultimately, I think it will be great guidance for you, and also like a real sense of accomplishment no matter what happens with it. If you wrote like 330 pages, that's impressive in itself.